Today on Histopedia, we're diving into one of the most famous acts of rebellion in American history, a bold protest that sent shockwaves across the Atlantic and pushed the colonies toward revolution. On December 16, 1773, a group of determined colonists, disguised as Native Americans, boarded British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. But what led to this dramatic protest? Why was tea, something as ordinary as a drink, so politically explosive? And what were the consequences of this audacious act of defiance? This is the story of the Boston Tea Party, a protest that became a turning point in America's fight for independence. To understand the Boston Tea Party, we have to go back to the early 1770s, when the relationship between the British government and its American colonies was deteriorating. By this time, the colonies had grown significantly, with a population of around 2.2 million people compared to Britain's population of about 8 million. Economically, the colonies were vital to the British Empire, but politically, tensions were mounting. One of the primary sources of conflict was taxation. After the costly French and Indian War, Britain was burdened with a massive debt, around 140 million, nearly double its annual revenue. To help cover the costs of maintaining its empire, Parliament passed a series of taxes on the colonies, including the Stamp Act of 1765 and the Townshend Acts of 1767, which taxed goods like glass, paper, and of course tea. The colonists objected to these taxes, not just because they were burdensome, but because they were imposed without colonial representation in Parliament, a grievance summed up in the rallying cry, "No taxation without representation." The tax on tea was particularly contentious. By the early 1770s, tea was a staple in American households. The British East India Company, which held a monopoly on tea imports, was struggling financially. To save the company, Parliament passed the Tea Act of 1773, which allowed the East India Company to sell tea directly to the colonies at a reduced price. While this made tea cheaper, it still included the controversial tax, and the colonists saw it as an attempt to trick them into accepting British authority. In cities like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, protests erupted. Many colonists boycotted British tea altogether, turning instead to smuggled Dutch tea or brewing their own substitutes. But tensions came to a head in Boston, where 3 ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, arrived in late November 1773, loaded with tea from the East India Company. Under colonial law, the tea could not be unloaded without paying the tax. Boston citizens, led by the Sons of Liberty, a secret revolutionary group, demanded that the ships return to Britain without unloading. Governor Thomas Hutchinson, however, refused to allow the ships to leave without the tax being paid. After weeks of stalemate, the situation reached a breaking point on the night of December 16, 1773. A group of about 100 colonists, many disguised as members of the Mohawk tribe to symbolize their American identity, marched to the harbor. Under the leadership of figures like Samuel Adams and Paul Revere, they boarded the ships and began their work. Over the course of 3 hours, the group smashed open 342 chests of tea, about 92,000 pounds worth, and dumped it into Boston Harbor. In today's money, the destroyed tea would be worth nearly $2 million. The sight of the harbor filled with tea leaves became a powerful symbol of colonial defiance. The Boston Tea Party wasn't just a protest against taxation, it was a direct challenge to British authority. The colonists had crossed a line, and the British government was determined to make an example of them. In response, Parliament passed the Coercive Acts in 1774, known in the colonies as the Intolerable Acts. These punitive measures included closing Boston Harbor until the tea was paid for, effectively crippling the city's economy, revoking Massachusetts' charter and placing the colony under direct British control, allowing British officials accused of crimes in the colonies to be tried in Britain where they were less likely to face justice, expanding the Quartering Act, forcing colonists to house British soldiers in their homes. Rather than quelling the rebellion, these harsh measures united the colonies. Delegates from across the colonies convened the First Continental Congress in 1774 to coordinate their response to British policies. The seeds of revolution were firmly planted. The Boston Tea Party wasn't just about tea. It was about the fundamental rights of the colonists to govern themselves. For Britain, it was a challenge to imperial authority. For the colonists, it was a bold assertion of their desire for freedom. The Boston Tea Party was a spark, a daring act of defiance that set the colonies on an irreversible path toward revolution. It wasn't just about tea, it was about standing up to tyranny and fighting for self-determination. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time here on Histopedia for more history videos.